50% of my recruit experience, there's some area where I'm able to say, we are interviewing you and you are interviewing us, because it's a two-way street.
Yeah, love that.
Yes, I think we have a great company. We have a lot to offer. It's an interesting time to join, but is it also for you an interesting time to join?
What is kind of the classic mistake that you see by candidates?
Not knowing the audience. Later in the stages, we always send who is going to be interviewing you. So I think it's good to then dive into, okay, what questions can I ask this person? So interview us. So ask me about my perspective, ask a hiring manager about theirs and your growth, ask a team about what is it like to work in that team, tailor it to the people you're speaking with.
So I've submitted an application to Miro. Is there anything like particularly worth pointing out about the application process that you kind of think would help candidates?
That's a good question. I would say,
hello and welcome to the Open to Work podcast. This is another amazing candidate journeys episode, and I'm joined by Rico Habraken, who is calling in from Amsterdam and works at Miro as a senior technical recruiter. Rico, welcome to the Open to Work podcast.
Thanks, Matthew, and well done on the pronunciation. I know that's a tricky one. So,
well, before we started recording, I did take 3 or 4 runs at it just to make sure I got it right. But look, really looking forward to this episode today. Like, Miro is a company that I think a lot of people around the world really admire and want to learn and hear more about. So a really kind of perfect guest. But before we get into the company, why don't you just introduce yourself and kind of your role at Miro?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you did a great job already there. So I'm Rico Habraken, a senior technical recruiter at Miro. Short introduction, I've been 3 years at Miro so far, jumping in at hypergrowth stage, just a little bit, I would say, after post-pandemic era. Have seen every little bit in recruitment here at Miro, I would say, from non-tech hiring to technical hiring, engineering, different locations. Yes, Amsterdam, Berlin, London, but also Yerevan that we have in Armenia. So quite an entire mixture there of what I've been focusing on lately. It's again, we're looking into non-tech hiring and engineering, but also a bit of recruitment operations. So looking at the system side instead of the candidate side. I think all around 3 years, we always joke at Miro that that's more or less double or more in Miro years, but it has been a good time so far. And
amazing.
Yeah, I'll pause there.
And just so that we get a full understanding, what is the role of a technical recruiter?
So mainly the division of a technical or a business recruiter, because we have that distinction, a business recruiter or a technical recruiter, is the roles and the domains that you're working with. We have a distinction between, let's say, AMPT. So AMPT is an abbreviation for analytics, marketing, product engineering, and design. Now, usually a technical recruiter will pick up anything that's in engineering. Product and design are still separate, but they could also be tech recruiting in that sense. But mostly it's engineering, because that's a really large organization. Just the entire org structure, I think we are 800 engineers or similar within Miro globally. So that's what a technical recruiter is mostly focused on.
Amazing. I think it's always useful for candidates just to hear like how these sorts of structures differentiate and who looks after what, because you see the title recruiter and you think that we all do kind of one thing, but actually there's lots of different subdomains and expertise that is completely dependent and contextual on the company that you work within and their size and scale and requirements. So great little insight. Well, just in case people don't know Miro, why don't you introduce a little bit about their journey, what they do, and why you've enjoyed working there the last couple of years?
Ooh, that's a lot of questions in one. Okay, I'll try to just go from the top and go there. I think luckily Miro is well known, so I hope I don't have to dive too much into specifics. Also, I know that when we are airing this episode, it will be after our October 8th Intelligent Canvas and Innovation Workspace launch. Key term, I need to remember that one for sure. That said, well, we can't use the word whiteboard because it's not. We were a whiteboard 10 years ago, but that's a quick evolution on where we started and how most people recognize it initially. Mm-hmm. But mainly what we're doing is we are empowering teams to create the next big thing, regardless of where they are in the world, regardless of their location. And we're helping them to innovate faster and create seamlessly. And of course, the canvas or whiteboard, in layman's terms, the canvas is kind of our engine to do that, because all the work from conception, definition to delivery, that all can land in that canvas from start to finish. So that's part on Miro. Now help me refresh my memory from that, going into vision, mission, and values, but mainly why did I join? I think 3 years ago, a little bit over 3 years ago, I was in my own job search, looking at, okay, I think I know this box that is recruitment from my previous company. Just trying to even find out, do I even want to continue in recruitment? So then I was also reading up on different recruitment structures, the way the organization is structured, like, for example, recruitment coordination and recruitment operations. And these were all very new terms to me. And then I got in touch, officially headhunted. Someone referred me to Miro and basically told me about what the structure is like. And it was exactly how I was reading this in these books. Talent Makers from the Greenhouse Founders, by the way, in case you know this book, a good read also for hiring managers. But then my main driver was learning and development. So again, I knew this box. I thought it was everything. Speaking to Miro, it was, not even fitting the screen. So many things where I could improve, develop, just going into different roles, different contexts, different processes. And I realized I didn't do that much with data either. Just something that I cannot even think about now, not using data for any of my decisions or any of my processes. But that's something that I found out and actually still maintain to this day. So when business recruiting became pretty comfortable, for some reason there was a switch to technical recruitment. When there was a bit of a slowdown there, I was able to go into more system side operations. Now we have a certain batch day for design happening at the moment, and I'm actually jumping on there to help out with some of the screens, and I have never done that before. So it keeps getting better and better. There's always learning and development that's there.
So it's the kind of diversity of projects and the access to different types of learning that's really kept you engaged for the last 3 years.
Yes. I can be very short. Yes, it's always there. You're not confined into a box to keep with that box reference. There's always so much you can pick up on. And sometimes you see that it's a large organization. So going into different areas of engineering, they might be in different maturity levels of recruiting too. So of course we try to get a standardized process in place, and mostly we do have this. But you do see with some where there was bulk hiring before, they have a pretty solid structure, and you go into a different area, a different domain, and it's complete chaos, or could be could use some work. And I think also there lies the challenge, if that's something that you like, is that, okay, you can do a little bit more than just recruiter screens and guiding that process from start to finish. It's also about looking at those processes. Are we doing the right thing? And can we help interviewers and the entire interview panel to do this better, easier, and make sure that basically the equation is input is output rather than somewhere being blocked in the middle.
Mm-hmm. And so just taking a step backwards and going to kind of the product journey of Miro, I think you're absolutely right. Like when I think of Miro, I really think about this kind of whiteboard product, and I've used it to kind of sketch out my own kind of designs and processes within recruiting. But you mentioned that there, and this isn't a plug, but obviously this entire episode is a bit of a plug, but like you mentioned that there was like a new product or a new iteration. Are you able to give us a little bit of insights into what we can expect and like what does the new look and new vision of the Miro business look like?
Yeah, so I would love to have our CPTO on this to explain this very well. So I would try to give my broken down version of it, but I think here it's all about changing the perspective of the market on how people view Miro. Especially what you're saying now, the first image that comes to mind if you know Miro is a whiteboard, but that's so limited to what we actually are. With the innovation workspace, basically we're trying to launch this image of Miro that is using Miro as the main area of work for your entire workflow. So it's so much more than just a brainstorm, having a couple sticky notes. A lot of our enterprise customers, they use it for deep use cases, from an entire product definition. It's discovery, definition, then delivery. That's kind of the three areas that we are trying to accelerate all of our strong points. Usually the perception is that Miro is very strong at its start, so discovery, brainwriting, these types of things, but actually it's used for so much more also in those latter stages. And that's where, with some of our latest product features and updates, we're going to be strengthened across all of those phases. Of course, we've deliberately waited a little bit with AI. AI is everywhere. People slapping a sticker on their logo and saying, hey, we're AI powered. We've been waiting quite deliberately on trying to see what is our customer journey going from this entire process, from discovery to delivery, and what areas there can we empower with AI that we've embedded in Miro. And that's something that we're also going to present, or at least by the time this is broadcasted, we have presented this on Canvas 24. So look at that and then see what features came up.
Yeah, it sounds
I hope I gave you a bit of an idea.
Yeah, I mean, with the candidate in mind, it sounds like one of the first pieces of research you should probably do is sitting there and kind of watching this. What sounds like it's going to be some sort of keynote and like key updates, and really trying to understand like what is the future of Miro and like where do they want to go and where is their product going? Because it sounds like it will be like an important brand shift, but also an important like product evolution over the next kind of couple of months. If you're thinking about interviewing with Miro right now, then take a look at these announcements. So Alderson James are one of the leading people and talent agencies. Since 2013, they've been responsible for over 1,000 people and talent hires, including one in a company that I used to work at. They helped me hire my head of technology TA. So I know the guys there pretty well. They've been responsible for scaling some of the most innovative companies in the UK and the EU. Also recently just launched in the US. So even folks in your neck of the woods now, James, can get involved for contingent, retained, and executive search. And they also now do embedded through AJX. So they can do it all. So let's now pivot and talk about the recruiting process. So give us a sense, I know that we'll talk mostly about technical recruiting, but give us a sense of like the broad overview of what you can expect as a candidate in the interview or recruiting process.
Yes, we do have differences across functions. So I just want to caveat that with, we do have differences here and there. We try to give on our Life at Miro and our careers page a little bit of an overview, but it can differ depending on the role that you're in. Usually very straightforward. It's approximately 4 to 5 interviews. Sometimes there's a test. Engineering, definitely there's tests or kind of like live coding, but I'll get to that. Mainly what you see, you apply, you get selected. So you have a recruiter screen with me or any of my recruiter colleagues. Going forward, in, let's say, the general rule for a finance position, you'll go to a hiring manager interview. We do test specifically in hiring manager interviews, not only your general experience, but also something we call Miro mindset. We're really looking for characteristics, traits that we find important for anyone joining Miro. Every Mironeer has these to a certain extent, and we see that leads to success. So that's something that we test immediately in that first interview. Afterwards, whether or not that there's a test, like a take-home assignment, this can be the case. Then we go into team round interviews. Often this is a peer. There's a different interview for a collaborator, a stakeholder that is going to be your main stakeholder. And when all of that's done, we have an internal debrief and trying to see, okay, will you go to a leadership interview if there's a leadership interview? Now, that's a rough sketch. I'm pretty sure if some of my colleagues are listening to this, it's like, that doesn't capture all of it. That's true. Engineering, for example, there after recruiter screen, we start with technical assessments. Yeah. And that also has to do with our pass-through rates. We know that's really tough to get through. It wouldn't make sense to take all of the time of our hiring managers to then have them drop off at technical assessments, which is the standard, industry standard for tech companies, a live coding, a system design. Those are the first 2 stages people need to get through. Then they will speak to a hiring manager, including that Miro mindset I just mentioned. Then a last team round, and depending on the level, a leadership interview.
Yeah. And so let's just kind of break this down in a bit more detail then. So let's start with Miro mindset. Are you able to articulate kind of what Miro mindset is, and then also like how you think about assessing this in candidates?
Yes. So basically we've did a lot of work, I think, in the past 6 months or so. It reiterated, because iteration, well, we'll get to that, but I guess it's one of the values that we have. So we launch fast and iterate. This is one of our Miro behaviors. Basically, like software, we have a minimum viable product and then we move on. And that doesn't go for software alone. This also goes for concepts. We're trying to see here, what are some of the more general characteristics that make a candidate succeed at Miro? Now, this is ongoing, so the long-term data we'll still get. But the initial idea is this. I don't know the reference of the book, but our CPO did share this with us. There are 6 characteristics or traits that could be a good indicator of success later. And in this case, let's see if I know this by heart still, but for example, there's resilience, generally resilience, cognitive agility, drive, empathy, accountability, and I'm missing one. That's always the case. And the way we try to prompt candidates to get examples showing this evidence is basically questions that are designed to get that response.
So like a behavioral question, like tell me about a time when you had a setback and how you recovered, or like for resilience, for example.
Yes, exactly. Something along those lines. We have different options because we do want to have a hiring manager decide what they think for their role is best to get a certain response. So we don't give just one question and that's the one they have to go with. Because for some of those characteristics will be more important than others. Overall, we do want to see evidence of all of those characteristics because it's really, in the end, if we have a perfect technical candidate, but they fail on Miro mindset, we will not hire them. It's something that we need to have as a pass.
So it sounds like on the back end that there's a kind of a lot of infrastructure and criteria that you're looking to assess on, but it sounds quite structured with lots of different questions and stuff like that. Is that what's happening on the back end?
Yes. Short answer, yes. Long answer with context. We have question banks. We've had them for quite a while. I would say in the 3 years I've been here, the first role I had already had some question banks as material to use. Because it goes a little bit further than Miro mindset. Obviously, it doesn't cover everything. Sometimes there are things like dealing with ambiguity or some of the soft skills that you see in our job descriptions that we also would like to assess on or for. And there you see that hiring managers or the team, they will need a little bit of input. Not everyone is a question wizard that they can just on the fly think of that. So that's where we build these question banks for Miro mindset, but also for other soft skill competencies that we can use, but also tweak if we see they aren't working.
Yeah, and I'll go through the kind of the decision-making process at the end, but when I'm kind of hearing this, I get kind of quite energized by the fact that there is structure happening behind the scenes. You can't, like, you're really thinking about what are the traits that we're looking for, what are the key skills, and also importantly, not just the what, but the how. How are we going to assess them? What questions do we think are going to lead to us uncovering the right skill sets for those responses? Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about Miro mindset, let's go through kind of from the start. So I've submitted an application to Miro, or I've come through sourcing, and we'll talk a bit about that in a second as well. But I've submitted an application. Is there anything like particularly unique or worth pointing out about the application process that you kind of think would help candidates?
That's a good question. I would say make sure just your CV is updated. Every CV that we get in, it's reviewed manually. We don't have any tool kind of filtering that. There's ghost stories on LinkedIn and everywhere that stuff like that is happening. Maybe not at Miro. We review all of those CVs ourselves. So I think that's a good point. And make it readable. That helps. Because of course, if there's a lot of clutter and I can't really see your story throughout your experience, it will be hard for me to assess, is this an interesting CV or not to go forward and speak with. When in doubt, we also check with hiring managers, especially if it's a new role, something that we haven't worked with too much in the past. We always go through this first kind of collaboration cycle and, okay, I see all these CVs. I'm not sure what to make of some of these. Let's just tag them and make sure the hiring manager also has a second look before we then start to ramp up. And then all of a sudden we know, okay, this is what we are exactly looking for. In short, what a candidate should do, make sure it's up to date. Gaps in your resume usually are fine as long as you were able to explain them. Like if you took a career break for a year, say that you took a career break for a year. I mean, this is always tricky advice because I know I see it from an ideal standpoint of what makes sense. I know that just generally in recruitment, not everyone does it the correct way, which is a pity. But when at Miro, at least your CV is a little bit of a story that gives us an insight into how you've progressed throughout your career, and potentially what links to what you want to do now because you applied for one of our roles. So I would just make that clear. If a position was a contract position, put that in there. If it was an intern position, put that in there. Because if you have, that's not a myth. If you have 4 experience, all of them are 3 months, and I can't see that that's meant to be 3 months, yeah, that's a little bit of a red flag, because weren't you able to keep a job for more than 3 months?
Mm-hmm.
But if it's an internship, or if that's a contract, you were hired for 3 months, that makes sense. Okay, so that's not a flag, right? You immediately omit some of the work that could go into a recruiter screen.
Yeah.
So just making that story clear, and going the extra mile, adding some bullet points on impact. I think in engineering we see this a lot more, but I also think in non-engineering roles you can definitely think of how did your role contribute to larger OKRs, for example, of the company. And being able to relate to that is also a sign of a little bit more seniority. So adding that in there is always helpful.
That's interesting. I always, I do feel that quite consistently engineers are really bad at doing this in their CVs as well. They're so kind of interested in talking about the interesting technologies that they've used, or like the interesting projects that they've worked on, that they don't necessarily run it up the flag and say like, this is what the impact was, or this is how we kind of changed customer behavior, or how we impacted the running of the platform, or whatever. And so, I see that mistake as commonly in engineering CVs as I do in kind of quote unquote business and corporate CVs. And so when you're like, do you presumably also headhunt candidates across the team? I mean, give me a sense of like how that experience may differ, if at all.
I would say in the end, the entire process is pretty much the same. We don't cut corners for headhunt. Well, I don't think we use the term headhunted that much. We just use sourced candidates.
Yeah.
Candidates.
I use headhunt because I think most people understand what headhunting is, whereas sourcing, I guess, is TA vernacular.
Yes, that's true. So yeah, to make that distinction, when you apply, it's inbound, it's an application, right? And when I reach out to you because I think I found your profile, whether that's on LinkedIn or somewhere else, that's outbound, which is me sourcing a candidate from the market. I think the main thing there is really getting clear at the start of the process why someone decided to pick up the phone or have the Zoom call with me. To start to know a little bit about Miro, we send a lot of information. So rather than saying, hey, I have a job for you, let's have a chat, we try in that first outreach message, or second one, or third one if we need to follow up. Because we do, follow up gets you a lot more response in the end. Even if it's a no is also an answer, which is better than nothing. But we try to have a lot of information there. So when we can, if there's a job description, we send a job description. If there's, for example, now a design, we have an entire section on our careers page where there's live at Miro, what does design do? So we try to send that link. So we give candidates as much information as possible to kind of paint a picture already what it would be like for that role. And if that hopefully triggers some, we try to touch on different drivers as well in different messages. I think the proactive information giving is something that's different from an applied candidate because they basically have to do their own research. But along the way, when they start to enter the process and we have that first recruiter screen, the only thing that might be different is if someone is really on the fence or still hesitating or has such a good other opportunity, we might, for example, depending on the level, do a cultivation call. I don't think it's like officially there in the process, but it's more if you're still deciding, but this is really a strong candidate, let's have a cultivation call that's with a hiring manager, just to have a better sense of often scope, responsibilities, growth path, a little bit more of an informal conversation rather than immediately being thrown into the interview process. That said, it is an exception. I just want to highlight that. We don't often do it. We really try to make sure we follow that structured process. Otherwise, we're going to make it really messy, especially for the scale that we operate in.
Makes total sense. I sometimes, in my day, would do a kind of a pitch call if a candidate was like particularly senior, etc., and then I would do an actual recruiter screen that would be like a deep dive assessment of their skills. And I think it's important that we still have that kind of assessment interaction as a recruiter at that top of funnel, like that is, you know, consistent with what we would do with inbound applicants as well. And just because we've sourced you doesn't mean that we shouldn't assess you thoroughly, and there's not a bias towards sourced candidates over non-sourced candidates, because that I think can also be extremely messy and not necessarily lead to the right outcomes or behaviors within the hiring organization. You know, just because someone is proactively coming to you doesn't change how good a candidate they may be.
Sure.
And in fact, it's actually a kind of demonstration of like your brand and the quality, you know, and their interest, and can be, you know, it's absolutely consistent. I know that there's like some conversation that said, well, you know, if you're looking for work, then are you really good enough? And no, that's completely wrong.
Yeah, I always say, I think 50% of my recruiter screens, there's some area where I'm able to say, we are interviewing you and you are interviewing us, because it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
I think that's very important for a hiring team to also keep in mind. Yes, I think we have a great company. We have a lot to offer. It's an interesting time to join. But is it also for you an interesting time to join? And is that opportunity for you interesting? And that's something together we try to find out and get someone through that entire process.
Yeah, fab. And so we've done the recruiting screen, and so if you're a technical candidate, then let's run through this. So you'll have you will go straight. Will you meet a hiring manager, or will you just go straight to a technical assessment?
Straight to live coding.
Okay.
Because generally we see just live coding and system design together. Pass-through rates hover between 35 to 45%, which is not a lot. And taking those two, then one after the other, that means you basically have 7 or 8 out of 10 candidates who did not pass. There is a distinction in level there, because we do have the same for a senior or a non-senior, but that process rules it out. We'll get kind of a signal on that assessment after those 2 initial technical assessments.
And so are those like paired programming exercises where you're sitting in a room, like a virtual room with an engineer, and you're working through a programming exercise together? Explain a little bit around the format of those 2 tests.
Yeah, so currently how live coding is done, we use HackerRank as a platform. We have our own custom questions made for that, and they are what I always say is they are similar to lead code medium complexity tasks. It's just one. We don't give them multiple ones. It's just one. And we look for 2 things. One, of course, trying to find an optimal solution, having clean code, but also collaboration and communication throughout. So having 5 minutes, you're completed, you didn't speak a word, and you have a perfect technical solution. We'll find it hard to assess communication and collaboration, might not cut it, because it is equally important for us. Same goes for system design. But live coding, 2 engineers usually are present with the candidate. They start out with a 5-minute introduction or even shorter. They share the HackerRank. There's a problem statement there. Reading through the problem, first trying to solve this verbally, discussing, asking, clarifying questions where needed. And then really working on it. Once you think you arrived at an optimal solution, then you can start to code. Often you don't find that immediately. It's also fine to look for a suboptimal one and then start to iterate from there. That's usually what happens. And those engineers are there to help guide you in the right direction, kind of also hear what your thought process is, and hence, very important, they will speak throughout the entire interview. With HackerRank, you can run your code as well. So then if there's any errors, they'll have to bug fix. Hopefully they don't. But with bug fixing, then I hope for them there's going to be 5 minutes left. Sometimes that's not the case, but at least to ask them questions as well. Especially for engineers, they're really speaking with engineers from not per se the team, but definitely from just generally engineering structure. So they can try to get some insight from them at the end.
Yeah, nice. And so it's a pair programming exercise. It sounds like is it about an hour long, would you say?
60 minutes, yeah.
Yeah, 60 minutes. And what kind of stands out to me is that yes, code quality is obviously important, but it's really about how you are solving problems and how do you iterate and learn on the fly about the kind of code that you're working with and the challenge that you're being set. We are delighted to be sponsored by MetaView. MetaView is the AI assistant for the interview process. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations like interviews, intakes, and debriefs, and then provides a perfectly summarized note of everything that was discussed. That means that you can focus on creating human connections with candidates during calls and save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. I've spoken to so many recruiters and recruiting leaders who are loving using MetaView across their organizations. It's saving them time, but it also means that they have more data to make better decisions. So for every candidate and every pipeline, hiring teams can now make confident and informed decisions, and recruiters can finally take control of the interview process. The impact on candidate experience is also massive. Since recruiters don't have to worry about taking notes in the moment, they can really focus on being present and engaged with you. Forward-thinking recruiters at high-performing organizations like Brex, HelloFresh, and Quora are all leveling up their interviews with MetaView. So head on over to metaview.ai/open to work to get started for free on your first 5 calls. Good. And then systems design, how does that differ?
Yeah, so system design is still stressful because it's also just 60 minutes and everyone runs out of time. System design is tricky because there's always trade-offs. There's no single answer. Yes, it's going to be tailored more or less to Miro, and that's all I'll give away because I don't want to lead people in the wrong direction for system design. You'll get basically also a problem statement or a design challenge that you have to go into. It still differs if it's front end or back end, depending on the role you're in the process for. But then system design starts same with a 5-minute introduction, giving that we have a Miro board. Obviously, we try to push the product where we can. So there is a Miro board where we can work on. Their tip: use Miro before you start this interview so that that's not a factor that's slowing you down. We prepare candidates for this too. So there's no excuse. Sometimes that's the thing, like, could have used Miro board a little bit better. Not a reason for rejection, by the way. That's really the content of the system design. I'll try to keep that short. I know I'm going in all directions here. What's tough is that you have to discover non-functional requirements as well. This is often forgotten. You get functional requirements, and the first 15 minutes or so, 10 to 15 minutes, try to narrow down what is the scope, what's in scope, what's outside of scope, what are the non-functional requirements my system has to be part of. And that's something that sometimes goes wrong. Then engineers should steer you in the right direction on, okay, now it's time to kind of jump to that next part where you're actually looking at the different areas. For us, we send the Miro boards as preparation as well in the start, where there's a lot of different areas we dive into. Specific to Miro, storage, distributed systems. Also, we look at observability, reliability of the system. And I often say to candidates that they should try to look at business metrics too, not just how to monitor, but also business metrics on checking those final two: observability and reliability. Did I cover everything?
I mean, I'm also not deeply technical, so I'm going to have to take you on your word that everything you're saying here is accurate, and I have to have someone from your team fact check you for me to make sure that this is, because otherwise we'll end up being like a Q&A on different types of system design terms that I might not understand, and that's, I don't think, what anyone wants to hear right now. So there's a lot of complexity happening here. There's a lot of conversations happening, and it's kind of 2 hours, and it sounds like it's like relatively intense 2 hours of testing. What can I do to prepare as a candidate for these 2 tests?
Yeah, so live coding, I've asked our engineers the same question. Like, if I would give you now a live coding assessment, would you pass? Like, is everyone 100% perfect? And most of them say not really, because you have to get into the mindset of this type of problem solving. It's not something you do every day. Still is an industry standard, so it's kind of hard to move away from it, although there are different schools of thought on this particular topic. That said, LeetCode, HackerRank, there are plenty of resources out there which help you specifically do this problem solving, and doing a couple of those exercises. I even say talk out loud for that collaboration and communication piece. Try to finish one of those LeetCode medium complexity tasks in 45 to 50 minutes, talking about what you're doing. we actually see that you're 3 times more likely to pass if you did some work before, instead of just going into it blind and trying to solve that problem.
So really just go into the resources, live code and HackerRank, and practice until you feel like you're, and hopefully if you do it a couple of times, then you'll really increase your chances of success.
Yes. Unfortunately, for system design, this is a lot harder to do. This is also, usually we say, live coding is about basics. It's about computer science. And often the more junior a candidate is, fresh out of, bachelor and master of computer science, they will ace the live coding. So let's say a strong yes in live coding has no correlation with what's going to happen in system design, because often system design gives you a lot more on their seniority rather than knowing those basics. So that's why those two actually are quite a nice mix, because system design, you're going to get questions you couldn't prepare for, and your experience that you had before and the multiple years you had, that will then give you the right answer sometimes, or you'll have to redirect and come up with alternatives to how you're designing a system.
Nice. So I've done my coding exercise, I've done my systems design exercise. How does this process finish? What's the final stages here?
After that, if you pass both, basically we go into that hiring manager and Miro mindset interview. That's one interview. Usually 60 minutes, can be a little bit longer, depending a little bit on the style of the hiring manager, but we try to fit this in 60 minutes. That's one. Also the team interview, 45 to 60 minutes as well, looking at differend competencies that are interesting for that particular role. Those are mainly for all, let's say, non-senior, senior backend or front-end engineer roles. That's where it ends. So we have the hiring manager, the team, then we do a debrief. Are we hiring, yes or no? And basically you get back in touch with me again to give you an offer.
Nice. Just, and maybe you can't share this, but once you've completed your technical tests, what is the success rate of a candidate typically in the rest of the process?
That's good, because of course there's 2 stages that we need to get through. I would say on average, the hiring manager is between 50 to 75% on that stage. Mm-hmm. And then team usually is also high, 50 to 75%. Yeah. So there is quite a good chance. Technical assessment clearly is the big filter here. Moving forward, as long as we also see the scorecards of live coding and system design, they can differ quite a lot. Are they clearly senior? Were both of them strong interviews? Do we see some gaps somewhere that we need to double tap on? If that's not the case, there is really high pass-through rate on those final stages. And then we do see, people just moving forward there.
So if you had 2 candidates at the same stage, post-technically, at hiring manager stage, post-technical assessment, you'd be relatively confident that one of them would get an offer?
Depending on the scorecards, yes.
I'm asking that question with my manager hat on and asking you to evaluate your funnel there quickly. I appreciate that. Awesome. Okay, so let's run through kind of a couple of quick fire questions then to wrap us up.
Sure.
What is kind of the classic mistake that you see by candidates?
Not knowing the audience. I think it's good to understand that, yes, I'm a technical recruiter. I will definitely understand most of your technical concepts, but when it comes to specific coding peculiarities, I definitely will not. So going too deep into examples or talking about a project and experience, try to see who's talking there so I can get a sense more on the scope and the impact that you did, rather than, for example, technical complexity. That will be very hard for me to assess. Later in the stages, we always send who is going to be interviewing you. So I think it's good to then dive into, okay, what questions can I ask this person? And we talked about, we're interviewing you, you're interviewing us. So interview us. So ask me about my perspective, ask a hiring manager about theirs and your growth, ask a team about what is it like to work in that team. It's really, tailor it to the people you're speaking with. I think that helps get a better picture.
Yeah, it's such an important one that I think for kind of all candidates can take heed of. That understanding that the audience that you're speaking to and tailoring your responses to that audience, right? Like one of the things that a technical recruiter might be assessing you on is how you explain what you do and your impacts in a basic way, in a way that someone who's non-technical could understand. And that is its own skill set that is highly valuable. And if you are able to go into loads and loads of detail about how technically challenging this was, but I don't, that doesn't mean anything to me if I don't have any context or understanding of what it is that you're doing and the impact and the higher level stuff that, and you've kind of gone on a tangent as a result of something that is not really going to help your cause, even though someone else would find it incredible, those things you've done. If you're not able to articulate that to the right person, the person who's sitting opposite you, it actually kind of shows a different type of skill set that is really valuable and important. So I think it's a good, it's a good kind of reminder to everyone, I think, on all types of processes, but especially for technical processes, to pitch to your audience and speak to your audience.
Yes, I can only confirm. I think the more senior you are in a technical role as an engineer, the better you get at this skill, because often your role will be positioned in the way that you're working cross-functionally, you're working with the business, and you need to be able to translate to the business what you're working on technically. So more senior candidates usually score better on this particular area.
I bet. And then maybe tell me a story about a candidate that really stood out in your mind, hopefully for positive reasons.
Yes. So I had this question in the start, right, to kind of know this. So I was thinking about who comes to mind, standing out, but also a very interesting process. I'll try to be short, which I've tried this entire podcast. So I had one candidate was for a technical product manager role. At that time, I was a non-technical recruiter, so pretty complex. Great candidates, went all the way to the finish line. In the end, at the finish line, we had two candidates, and we didn't hire her at the start. We had so many update calls in between. It was kind of like just being with a colleague already. So it was really a big bummer that we couldn't hire her. But luckily, there was another role, technical program manager, that was open at the same time, also in its final stages. So we need to do an additional interview with a different hiring team. She did a really good job, but still there was one candidate who was a bit more experienced that we decided to hire. And you understand that that's devastating. So it's at this point 2 times silver medalist and incredible. So of course she decided to take another opportunity. I think it was in Denmark. 2 weeks later, I hear from one of my colleagues, "Hey, were you still in touch with this candidate? I have a role, a second opportunity for technical program manager. Can you try to get in touch?" So I said, "I will only get in touch if there is no other candidate, if we have no additional interviews, and if we give her straight, immediately an offer that she wants and will accept." And they're like, "Okay, let's do that. We fill this role." So I call her up. She's 2 weeks in her new company. And I said to her on chat, like, "Hey, shall we have an update call?" Which is kind of an inside joke because we had so many update calls.
Why is this guy getting in touch again?
Yes. So she's like, "Okay," shared the story. In the end, she decided and said, "Yes, I'll join Miro." And she's been here ever since, doing really well. I think recently she got promoted even. And I'm very happy. She was a great candidate. I think that process just on the experience side from both of us was really nice. Really getting to know each other quite intimately in that sense, if that's the right word. But it came through. So we did have that opportunity and we could get her in, even though she was all set to relocate to Denmark, but we caught her just before.
Wow. I mean, I think it goes to show like the relationship that you develop with a business over time, I think this can be really important and really impact kind of your career, right? Like, if you didn't have that relationship with her, that you felt like you had a trusted interaction, that, you could call her up, or if she'd kind of absolutely gone off on one and been, quite rude to you and been quite frustrated, which she would have had every right to be at that point, let's be honest as well. But if she burnt that bridge, then obviously this opportunity would not have been presented to her. And so how we accept feedback, no matter how frustrating it is, accepting it with grace and positivity can then lead to potential other opportunities, and you never know what that might look like. Even if you'd gone on to a different business, right, and you needed to hire, you might have still looked her up, and it would have been only because of your relationship and the way that you've interacted over that period that she would have considered picking up the phone to you. And I think it's something that's really how you accept rejection in a candidate can be so hard, and I've been there and I totally get it, but it also can pay back dividends if you take the risk averse approach and accept it with grace and move, stuff like this does happen in businesses all around the world every day.
It does. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. And so, Rico, just to round us out then, why do you think a candidate should come and work at Miro?
Well, if it wasn't clear from more or less this entire episode, after 3 years, I'm still very excited to work here. I think, of course, every company goes through its rough patches. We've seen the technology industry in general go through a bit of a downhill slide. But right now, where we are at Miro, including when this is broadcasted with our October 8th launch of Intelligent Canvas and the Innovation Workspace, is just very exciting to see where we are going. I hope it will have the same impact in the market. And just generally, if you're looking for a place where you're learning, you're growing, your development is priority number one, including having in all areas of the business impact. Yeah, this is where you have to be. Like, I'll stop there, because if it's not clear from the excitement on my face, then I don't know what I have to do.
Okay, well, I'll leave it there as well. Thank you so much, Rico, for coming on. And thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode of the Open to Work podcast. I hope you, if you're applying to Miro, it sounds like there's plenty of reasons to do that. And if you're kind of just interested, to keep a look at the kind of Miro careers page. Sounds like there's loads of resources on there. Connect with Rico on LinkedIn. And if you're interested in kind of being part of the Open to Work community as well, you can check us out at opentowork.community. It's an amazing and thriving kind of resource for people out there who are navigating this really challenging job search. Is built and curated entirely by HR and recruiting leaders. And obviously we'll be coming to you live every Monday and Wednesday with episodes of the podcast, and then our candidate journeys episodes as well, which will be free forever. So Rico, thank you again so much. Learned so much from this. I think I'm a better technical recruiter as a result of speaking to you for 45 minutes, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for having me, Matthew. Take care.